Yes, I know it's the middle of the afternoon. My name is Banti Chand, and I'm Indiaspora's #1 employee in Singapore. And yes, I absolutely deserve an applause. And so I just want to say that we have several new members at the Indiaspora team, and we don't know all of you. So it would be wonderful if you stop us outside and say hello. That's all I wanted to say. But I do have the pleasure of introducing the next panel, and which is on a global collaboration for ethical and responsible giving. And I would be very happy if Mr. Shekhawat would join me on the stage so I can introduce him. This is Mr. Bhavani Singh Shekhawat, and he's widely recognized as a global change maker and is a Carlton Fellow. And he's had a career of 4 decades with top companies in Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa, and North America. And he's currently a global mentor and board member at the Akshay Patra Foundation, the world's largest and perhaps most celebrated school meals program. And it currently serves over 2.3 million children every day in India, and having served nearly 4 billion meals. So Mr. Bhavani lives in London and also calls Jaipur home. Very nice to meet you. And he's going to bring the rest of the panel on board.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Indiaspora, MR, Sanjeev, and the team for this opportunity. I see this session largely as a continuation of what we just heard. But for the simple fact that we have a fantastic panel where my fellow panelists would be practitioners, and one of them obviously is a philanthropist. I think that the whole conversation around development has moved up a notch and probably got accentuated straight after COVID. And there are 2 or 3 reasons for this, and particularly when we look at India, for example. On the one hand, we have the economy galloping away, 5 trillion, India at 100, fantastic ambition, great faith, and obviously a lot of interest from the world around us. But equally, around the world, we have challenges that are unprecedented. I live in England, where for the first time we have food inflation of 17%, and never seen the kind of poverty that we see in a G7 country. So on the one hand, we have this 2-speed world where our macroeconomics or global wealth has been galloping away. But on the other hand, like you just heard, our problems have remained the same. Our #1 UN SDG is poverty, #2 is hunger. And over the years, we have probably collaborated to create one more, which is the 17 SDGs. And not only it is shameful, and I'm using this word responsibly, that we are 70 or 60 years behind the run rate on when we should have solved our problems. The funding gap between the SDGs and the money that is available to solve for them is in excess of $100 trillion. We'll never have the money to solve our problems. So what do we do to ensure that my grandchildren, your children, grandchildren, do not face up or do not have to live in a world where poverty continues to be our #1 problem? Lack of nutrition, lack of food remains our problem, and we have additional problems. So that's an interesting conundrum that we find ourselves in. Alongside, there is really no such thing today as a first world and a third world. There is enough of the first world in the third, and there's enough of the third in the first. I was just speaking to my fellow panelists, and they said in Canada, 1 in 3 children suffer from hunger. In the UK, that number is 1 in 4. 1 in 4 children in the United Kingdom, which is a G7 country, live in food poverty. And it's probably, the jury is out whether those proportions are worse there than what we have in India. So what it really means for the 2nd-generation philanthropists, what frameworks, what kind of collaboration do they need to ensure that they make or they leave the world a little bit more equitable, a little bit more better than how they inherited? So given these challenges, I have the privilege of inviting my fellow panelists, Aditya Jha from Canada. Among other things, he proudly wears the Canadian Honor Order of Merit. And he's been doing a lot of interesting work from Canada in India. Shantini Naidu, who's traveled all the way from down under. She's the CEO of St. Vincent's Current Foundation, which funds a whole load of healthcare initiatives. Mittal Gohil from the Desai Foundation, again, actively engaged in philanthropy in 6 states in India. And Mansi, who runs the Delhi chapter of Teach India Foundation. So if I could ask each one of you to quickly introduce a little bit about your work to the team, but also share with the group out here, where do you think some of your biggest challenges lie? We've heard a lot of interesting tidbits throughout the sessions today. $500 million flowing into India just from the United States in terms of philanthropy, the challenges of philanthropy in India, the frameworks, the lack of collaborative models, and so on and so forth. So Aditya, if I could start with you, could you just share with us your experience in philanthropy, your challenges, and what you think might be a better framework than what we have currently?
This is a very, very rich question, and it would deserve that I should give a very long response, but I will not. But also you said in the beginning that introduce yourself. And I thought I'm going to introduce myself in a very different way, not as who I have been, but who I would like to be. And I would like to be introduced towards the end of my journey as a philanthropist, not as what I did, where I worked, whether I succeeded in a business or not succeeded. So that would be my introduction. I have grown into philanthropy, and I distinguish between philanthropy and charity. I think most of the things which happens is a charity, which I consider to be very transactional. And philanthropy is charity you give to something, some cause, to someone. Philanthropy eventually keep giving to yourself, because you are constantly evolving yourself in terms of what you want, what you like, what you want. I think the best example would be, I don't think Tilak said that I'm going to give Indians freedom. He says, Swatantrata mera janma siddh adhikar hai, mera. He didn't say yours. So I think philanthropists eventually, they do things for themselves, what they really believe. Their self becomes more enlightened. And when they're giving to themselves, the impact of that giving happens on the masses. So that is the distinction, I would say. For me, I had chosen, I started my philanthropic journey in 2003. And chose 3 fields, and I dropped one, and I have continued with 2. One is education and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship was primarily focused on nurturing entrepreneurship in the Aboriginal community of Canada. And for education, I did with the universities. But as I have spent last 4 years more so in my village in Bihar, and I have recognized that what the world needs primarily, if I have to choose the proportion, even more than education, is wealth creation or job creation by yourself. So micro entrepreneurship is going to be increasingly my focus.
Thank you, Aditya. Shantini, if I could extend this question to you, because you run an interesting foundation that is really an external arm of an organization that you singularly support. What has been your experience in building an effective model of governance and perhaps an attitude to giving for the organization that you run.
Thanks, Bhavani. As Bhavani said, I'm the CEO of St Vincent's Curran Foundation. We're the fundraising arm for St Vincent's Health Australia, which is the largest not-for-profit health provider in the country, and we cross over public and private, aged care, at-home services, virtual care, and service about 3.3 million patients a year, which is big in Australia. The organisation was founded on the mission of serving the poor and the vulnerable. Because we're not for profit, even though we have government funding and we also have private hospitals where we generate money to fund our system, philanthropy is essential to funding gaps in that system. There's a number of comments that have been made. I think Sumit in the last panel talked about the fact that ultimately, if philanthropy will not solve the problem sustainably in terms of health inequity, and in Australia we do have also a significant health inequity with our homeless populations and our Indigenous populations, which is why I'm proudly wearing this Indigenous design dress to highlight the fact that still in Australia, Indigenous Australians have a 17-year, there's a 17-year life expectancy gap. And for a country like Australia, that is still, you know, a terrible situation to be in. So in our system, what we've done is try to really align our philanthropy to focus on how we can change the system through improved models of care, new models of care, and also through innovation. And that aspect of our healthcare system does not have the capability to attract government funding. And therefore, in fact, the hospital system in Australia is almost disincentivised because it's funded on a model of healthcare in the hospital. And so we use philanthropy as much as we can to try and support change in the system and actually build in evaluation and measures from the start with the aim of then embedding it into the healthcare landscape nationally. And so in that, I think there are learnings in terms of how you can set up a framework, because it is a partnership. Philanthropy is a partnership, as Aditya just said, and there's as much responsibility on the side, I think, of the fundraiser to actually manage the expectations of that partnership from the start. And in terms of building in the sort of ethical and responsible methodologies to encourage philanthropists not to place unnecessary demands on the already, you know, stretched resources of the public health system, for example, to manage the level of influence that they expect to have or the level of advantage that they sometimes seek can be a challenge. And you can only do that successfully if you are able to work in partnership. Because a lot of the programs that we fund take a long time, they take 5 to 10 years sometimes to gather the data to actually prove that it should be then funded by government. We really strive to work with philanthropists on a multi-year basis. So we, you know, seek to develop a program with the philanthropists that can actually then track outcomes over a long period and also then prove the case to government for sustainable funding.
It's quite interesting that you bake into the whole program both elements of sustainability and shared responsibility whilst keeping a strong sort of governance structure.
Well, we try.
Right, right. If I move it over to you, Mittal. We heard an interesting perspective from an organization that is set up to fund exclusively the arm that they support. In your case, you do multiple kinds of work in multiple states. what do you think would be your biggest challenge in terms of seeking collaboration from both philanthropists as well as the agencies that you collaborate with to create the kind of impact that you aspire to?
Hello. Yeah. I am Mittal Gohil, and I run an organization called the Desai Foundation Trust. Just to clarify, my first name is Mittal, and my last name is Gohil, because normally people do get it that Mittal is my last name. So just to clarify, my name is Mittal. The Desai Foundation aims to empower women and children through community programs by elevating health, livelihood, and menstrual equity. 25 years ago, we started working in one state. Back then, I was not even with the Desai Foundation when they started. We were only in Gujarat, but the way we have the way we have structured our program is quite scalable. That's why now we work in 8 states in India. And we, entire of our programs aim to work with women and children. Just to answer your question, Bhavani, that of course, we are not doing any work by ourselves in the states that we work in. The way we operate is that we collaborate with community-based organization locally. So like Sumit really said well, that there are thousands of NGO who works in local area who do provide extensive hard work and give their 100% to make sure that we bring the change that we really want to create the impact in the communities. But when it comes to philanthropy, one thinks that it's an individual and personal desire. They want to bring a change. They want to enforce things on people the way they think. But it's really not about an individual intention. Rather, it should be a collaborative effort. Because when there are 5 people collaborating to create an impact, there are diversity. There are different strengths. There are multiple things that can bring to a table to create a positive and a sustainable change. So the way we work in the rural communities, it's really hard, challenging, and of course, from the point of view of the philanthropist, when we collaborate or when we have a donor, it's very typical way of giving. There is no structure in it. They'll say, okay, we'll fund you for 6 months, or we'll give you for 12 months. There is not long-term investment we have noticed the way we are giving right now to the organizations. So first and foremost thing that I would propose here is that once you are starting investing, the way it should be structured is for the long term. And of course, it has to be supported not only through the capital expenses, but it also has to include the operational cost, because we need a human force to make sure that we create impact that you want to see the impact. Everybody is giving just to make sure that we have an impact. We have numbers that, oh, we have impacted millions of people. That's what everybody wants to see when they give money, right? But to do so, you need to invest your money for long term. That way it will help us to bring the real change in the communities.
Thanks, Mithil. I think there's a common strain around sustainability or sustainable funding or capacity building. So if I was to move it over to you, Mansi, what you do by design is a catalyst, education. And therefore, you have to collaborate with multiple stakeholders, be they the school system, be it the government, be it the parents and children themselves. And so therefore, what would be your approach to making sure that A, there's suitable and more collaboration, but also it becomes sustainable or self-sustaining in a way?
Thank you for that question. I'm Mansi. I'm from Teach for India, not Teach India, just clarifying that quickly. And I have myself been a teacher in 2012, and I am currently in my 12th year of my work with Teach for India. What we do here is actually, we aim to create an India free of poverty filled with love. That is something that we aspire to do, and we do that by committing to 3 commitments: commitment to leading self, commitment to leading others, and commitment to leading India. And when I extend the same 3 commitments to the work that, our donors, philanthropists do. It's very simple. Leading self, I think you spoke about this, how it's so important to immerse yourself in the work that we're doing. Money is very important for us to survive and do the operations, but if we truly want to thrive, we need more than money, right? We need your expertise, we need your guidance. One of the important experiences that I have had a good fortune of having incredible people on my advisory board who not just give, but actually are able to contribute much more. So they help us solve problems, they help us give strategic direction, they help us break barriers that we foresee in our work. Today, we serve about 32,000 students across 8 regions in India, and we have about 4,000 plus leaders doing this work even beyond the fellowship that we have. So the first thing about leading self is how do we immerse ourselves? Then comes the commitment of leading others. How do we ensure we are being advocates and ambassadors of the work, right? Of course, we need you, but we need many more like you. And we need all of these people to not just believe in our work, but contribute to our work. And so how can you bring in those partners, the cross-sectoral partners that have not heard about us, that don't know about our vision and mission? And I say that for Teach for India, but I actually say that for all organizations, right? How do you bring people to this work more and more and aggregate them towards the cause? And finally, leading India, right? We are doing something much beyond what the organization is trying to do. We are trying to create an India free of poverty, filled with love. And that cannot happen with micro inputs. It takes a village to raise a child, is what we always believe in at Teach for India, right? And that village, if it expands to India, we need so many more partners who can come in and do the work, who know that, okay, there's a pilot that's working. How do we scale it? What does it take to not only fund the pilot, but fund the scalability of that pilot, the sustainability, as you said. So I think these would be 3 extensions of what we do internally to what you could do as a contributor.
Fantastic. There's a constant theme around development, which is really around serving underserved causes. I think we had Sumit mention it. But equally, to create structural reforms within the for impact sector for speed and scale. At Akshaya Patra, we often say that when 5 people get together to feed 50, the 5 feel a lot better about it than 50. But if 5 people could come together to feed 50,000, then that's truly bringing human ingenuity, intelligence, systemic learning, change, and advocacy, and everything that the universe has been kindly gifting us. Then that truly creates systemic change. So Shantini, in this context, what really would be an interesting ethical or moral challenge? Because a lot of people fundraise for sustainability and for long-term impact, so on and so forth. But a philanthropist gives because they feel strongly about something. And there is a lot of discussion around the ethics and morality of giving. Do you want to share some of your thoughts around where there might be an interesting conversation to be had?
Actually, I think from what I've been hearing in the last few days, from speaking to people in this room and on this panel, what's occurred to me is that we have a whole lot of philanthropists and people here and in the Indiaspora around the world in cultures where philanthropy is probably operating a little bit more strategically. And in fact, cultural change around the expectations of funders is something that could take a long time. But in fact, if we've got the philanthropists themselves, particularly in this Indiaspora group, where, they're also being philanthropists in Canada or Australia or the US particularly, that experience could really contribute to helping solve some of the framework and cultural issues of that shift that's needed for philanthropy to solve some of these systemic issues more strategically. And so cultural change, and Australia is not that established in philanthropy. 20 years ago, I did a Churchill Fellowship to study philanthropy in the US and the UK because philanthropy was so underdeveloped in Australia, and that's not a very long time. So in 24 years' time, as a diaspora, we could have really made a difference by bringing the learnings from cultures where it's more developed to India. So I think that could be a contribution which goes beyond money from this group.
Interesting. Aditya, if I may turn it over to you, because you've been giving individually both time and money, and you've shared some mixed experiences. So if there was one or two changes that you'd like to bring about that create a fantastic framework around ethics and morality of giving, what would that be?
So my journey has been for over the last 20 years, and I think a lot about this philanthropy, as I said. My style so far had been more like a cowboy style. I have my money, I like this cause, I like this guy, let me give me some money here. But I have recognized that is not the best way of doing it. And I also realized that I have worked with people who are way more money than I have, is that by us giving, it's not going to make any systemic change. We need the catalytic kind of ingredient or a recipe into philanthropy. And especially on this forum, Indiaspora forum, I would say that there should be debate and discussion about how the diaspora givers, instead of only thinking about giving their money to their cause, how they can make a catalytic impact. And not only they give, but they motivate the locals to give. And couple that, and also leverage, I would say a multi-layered leverage of using government resources. I have seen that people like us have more credibility in my locality where I have grown up. They look up to you. And when I'm ready to give my money, I'm ready to give my presence, then I can also motivate and use and leverage the government resources. So that catalytic part, and one, I know the time is up, but ultra net worth people in India, many of them doing things because the CSR is mandatory. And there is a lot of criticism of that there is sometimes, and maybe it's anecdotal, there is a flow back of the fund. That in some way, direct or indirect. So we have to see that how that thing is plugged and managed.
So just a quick comment from Mansi, you first, and Mittal, you next, around if you had one request from philanthropists that would help you do your job a lot better, a lot faster, and to greater impact, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what I said, but act. I think beyond giving, act, get involved, tell us what's working, what's not working, how do we do this for a much larger audience than what we are already doing. But I think for that we need more than money. We need the time, we need the guidance. So I would love for us to come together, and like my board meetings are an example of that, where people just get together and think of innovation, ideas, how do we solve for barriers in this wicked problem of education, and then actually just go ahead and do it and see if it works or not. So more than just giving, how do you get us to innovate, stay with us, and then help us get a little bit faster, a little bit longer. That would be something that would help us.
Great. Mittal?
I would completely agree with her that, more than money, what we need is time, your expertise, the strength, the kind of diversity that you bring in to the table, because pouring money will never solve the problems. If that would have been the real, if money is solving the problem, that we would have probably gotten out of all these nonprofits that work in rural areas. So money is not the only thing that we need when we actually work in the communities. What we need is the time, the expertise, and of course, the problem solving and solutions to create more impact in the communities. That's what we need as a nonprofit when we work in rural area. And if I can take 1 minute to just explain one live example of it, is that on the ethical and responsible giving, that when we, in 2020, when we met SP Hinduja, they were like, we want to support 500 families who lost their family members during COVID time, and they just wanted to give away money. So then we jumped in and we said, giving away money will never solve the family problems. You should rather deploy the family member who lost their family members from the community, and they will thrive and run all of our programmings in their own communities. And those 500 heroes on ground right now are leading all of our programmings in 1,500 villages in 8 states in India, and they are the one who have now become the real heroes who are bringing the change in the communities. So that's what we want, that the money that we are getting needs to be directed towards the real impact that we should bring in the communities. So, yeah.
Great. I really wish I could invite questions from the audience, but the panelists are going to be around. I'm sure you can meet and ask them questions. But if I was to summarize this whole discussion, to me, 3 things stand out. One is that from the standpoint of organizations that are executing wonderful programs on the ground, they need a little bit more than money. So money is a necessary, not sufficient condition. So maybe, like Ashish talked about system orchestrators, we probably need a Shark Tank equivalent. I think philanthropists should take stake in the philanthropy work that they do and truly give the very best that they have. In other words, if you are a Siemens or a telecom company, what is your genius that you can bring to the work that might have a social orientation? Because whether it's technology, we've heard so much about AI and robotics, and Akshay Patra, we use blockchain, AI, robotics, and artificial intelligence to actually put a fantastic meal together so that children can enable themselves into education and so on and so forth. So if the very best in the world could combine with the very best in the world, then we could leapfrog our problems. In other words, we won't be staring at a situation 20 years down the road where our number 1 problem is poverty, number 2 is hunger, and then global economy has gone into 500 trillion or so on and so forth. So that's clearly an ask. The second is probably there is, in that framework, there is a stronger need for long-term capacity building. I hear a lot of philanthropists engage in philanthropy saying that I want this to be done in 12 months or 6 months or 8 months. I think some of our panelists have been shy of talking about it, but we did have a prior discussion. How do we really have long-term capacity building? In other words, if you were to enable an organization, what would be the Uber? And maybe that's not the best example of social impact. That how long would it take for an organization not just to develop speed and scale, but to create the kind of impact that we envisaged in the very beginning, and to invest in that capacity building? And once again, there could be system orchestrators, but there could be incubators that, in addition to philanthropy, that is required. And the third thing is really, how do we coalesce? How do we create interoperability between our various SDGs? Our SDGs are not orthogonal. They are not, mutually exclusive. Collectively, they might be exhaustive. But how do we create interoperability? How do we create a system where, like Mithil just said, that you empower a family to not just leapfrog education, but to create a system where they have better health, better attainment, better education, better lifestyles, and also leave behind a better environment? And while it might seem onerous, it's doable, because we do have minds that have created some of the world's best organizations. So clearly, if you could bring that into philanthropy and into social impact, the world would be a better place faster. Thank you.